Welcome to the Book Binge. I am your host, King Crusoe. You can call me KC, and today we are looking forward to 2026 a little bit. I know it's still a few months away, but I am looking forward to some of the reading that I have kind of my eye on doing come next year because I want to branch out a little bit in 2026. Let's talk about a few different things what I mean by branching out. The first main thing for 2026 is that I'm going to be finishing Wheel of Time relatively early in the year. Of course, at the time of this video's release, I am currently reading, or actually I've probably finished. I have definitely finished Crossroads of Twilight. I'm going to be reading Knife of Dreams here in a couple of months-ish. We'll see. I have no idea what my schedule looks like for the rest of the year, basically, in forms of, specifics. But, I'm around there, and then early next year, probably, February through April, February through May, however long it takes, I'm going to be finishing the Wheel of Time. And because of finishing the Wheel of Time, I'm going to be able to move on to new fantasy things that I want to read that aren't Wheel of Time. So that's something that I'm looking forward to being able to discuss. And then there's also several other random authors that I would like to be able to read as well. Most of these come on recommendation from a couple particular friends, but then a couple of these other authors have been on my radar for a little while, and it's just taken longer than I've wanted for me to actually get around to them. But first, to lay down some ground rules for what we will be discussing in this video, this is specifically new authors. What do I mean by new authors to read in 2026? Well, what this means is that they'll have to be authors that I have not read before. That's what I mean by new authors, not necessarily people who are publishing for the first time in 2026 or anything like that. I feel like this note is a little bit more self-explanatory, but I still felt like it was worth mentioning. These are just authors who I have not read before. At the same time, I also have a second criteria for how I want these things to be listed here. These have to be authors that I plan to read at least 2 books from. So if there's a new author that I only really plan to read 1 book from, or that I'm not inclined to read their entire bibliography or whatever have you, they're not going to be on this list. So books like Lord of Dark Places by Hal Bennett, despite it being a personal favorite of several of my friends, not going to be including that in this video because I only plan to read that 1 book by the author. I have no idea what else that author has actually written, and I have to determine if I even like what that book is offering before I even determine if I want to try to explore more from that author, for example. So like I said, these are going to be authors for whom I plan to read more than 1 book from at some point in time. Maybe I don't plan to read more than 1 book from them next year specifically, but rather 2026 will be the year that I start reading books from those authors. That's totally fine. But again, if it's a case of an author where it's only 1 thing that I plan to read from them, that's another instance of something where I'm not going to put that author on here. Even Roberto Bolaño, for example, who wrote 2666, that's a book that I want to read, and maybe I want to read it in 2026. Not likely, but that's the only thing that author has written that I'm inherently interested in at this moment, so I don't really have a reason to put him on the list. Finally, before we get into the thick of things, let's talk about the structure of this video a little bit. We'll first start off with 5 honorable mentions, items which I probably won't, in the grand scheme of things, be able to get to in 2026. Books that I would like to read, or authors that I would like to start reading come next year, but that I most likely won't have time for, but I kind of have them on my radar just in case, or if I determine that I want to read one of them anyway, regardless of whatever else I have going on at the time, because it wouldn't be the first time something like that has happened. But these are going to be honorable mentions, people who I have my eye on for 2026, but probably won't happen. I'll have a couple of special authors in the middle after that, which aren't really the usual type of thing for me or my channel that I will mention. So there'll be a couple of special mentions, I guess, even before honorable mentions, but that's what I'll get into. And then I'll have my actual top 5 at the end of things in approximate order of priority. These are things that are almost certainly going to happen in 2026, barring anything super crazy happening, because I made a commitment back in December of 2024 saying I'm going to read these 5 classic books in 2025, and there's a possibility I won't have actually read those 5 books this year just because of how crazy my schedule ended up being for a few months and how much that upheaved everything, really. So like I don't want to make a confirmed promise and say these 5 authors I will read in 2026, because there's a chance one of them might not happen. There's a chance I pick up an honorable mention instead or something along those lines. These are just things that I have my eye on for 2026. To start off the honorable mentions, let's talk about Robert McCammon, who has written very many various different books, as well as the Matthew Corbett series. I have plenty of McCammon's work that I am interested in checking out at one point or another. Swan Song and Boy's Life are the ones that are kind of highest on my radar at the moment, aside from Matthew Corbett. But McCammon is definitely an author absolutely on my list, kind of in that realm that like Stephen King kind of occupies, maybe Michael Crichton a little bit, where you have authors with a lot of like standalone books, where, you know, some of them have series. Stephen King has The Dark Tower. Obviously, McCammon has Matthew Corbett that I already talked about, but where a lot of the books are kind of standalone, and I can just like pick and choose a book now and again to get to according to how I feel, like mood-based kind of thing. That's the kind of territory that I want Robert McCammon to sit in. I definitely had my eye on him for a couple of years, but he's the very lowest one here on the honorable mention list because, well, I don't think this is going to happen in 2026. On the note of King and Crichton, I still have many more books from both of those authors that I need to get through, but before I feel like I'll actually be super confident or comfortable with adding McCammon kind of into that rotation. Maybe I'll do it in 2026 regardless and kind of make it a little bit more sporadic, but like Michael Crichton especially, I want to get through a lot more of his stuff before I start adding too many more of these authors like of this sort where standalones are kind of the thing. But we'll see what happens. He is still on my list, though, someday. Probably not in 2026. Still thought he would be worth a mention. Next up is going to be Diana Gabaldon, author of Outlander, which is right back there in the video, actually. I've had several people over the years actually comment kind of teasing and making fun of having this series in the background of my videos for some reason, because I think for some reason this has the reputation of being like a romance, like a women's series or something like that. Even though the thing that I've gotten out of all the pitches that I've got for the series or things that I've read about the series seems like it's fun historical fiction stuff in the sense that's like, yeah, I'm totally willing to read that. Why not? If it has romance kind of stuff going on in there as well, who cares? I'm not against romance per se, but the historical fiction aspect is definitely something that I have interest in. And in either case, Outlander is a series that is very unlikely to happen in 2026. I definitely wouldn't read the whole series, of course, but like maybe I would start, you know, the first book or something next year. Probably not. But now that I am finishing Wheel of Time, I would love to start branching out into other big series that I've kind of had on my TBR for Check's Watch at this point. Over 2 years, pretty close to 2.5 years at this point, where it's like just been a long time of me reading Wheel of Time. I want to get some other long-running series that I would like to be able to give a shot. Outlander is one of those series. Maybe it's something that I'll get to and make a priority because of like an audiobook. Like maybe I'll get the audiobook somewhere and do it via immersive reading or something like that. I don't really know, but I do have a couple of friends who have hounded me on this for a little while. It will happen eventually, probably not in 2026, but it is something that like I have my eye on, and like maybe I'll change my mind. Maybe I'll do the first book with audiobook or something like that. I have no idea. The next honorable mention will be John Williams. Not that John Williams, but this John Williams, author of Stoner and Butcher's Crossing. There's a couple of other books in there as well, but these are the two that like a lot of my friends really, really like. He has another book called Augustus that seems to be a little bit more on the hit or miss side as far as like my friends go with John Williams. But these two books I am super interested in. Like I've heard just too many good things about the books, about, you know, John Williams in general, that it makes it impossible for me to not be interested in his writing. The fact that these couple of books anyway are pretty standalone and also relatively short, you know, they're only a couple hundred pages a piece, that also makes it pretty attractive as far as like just picking up a random book goes. So maybe I'll actually pick up a John Williams book in 2026. I don't fully know yet. There's also the incentive that I actually missed Stoner as part of a monthly read-along classic in like September of 2024, I think is when that was voted or something like that. So I need to catch up on that book technically in my brain's eye. Maybe I'll pick it up in 2026, maybe not. That's why it's an honorable mention. The next honorable mention is one that I'm fairly certain isn't likely to happen, but because these books are short and supposedly pretty quick as a result, maybe I'll actually start to pick up a little bit of Earthsea by Ursula K. Le Guin. You see this and think like, that's absolutely massive. That's because there's like 6 books and also short stories and stuff in here as well. So like, it is a big collection of a lot of stuff, but the books in and of themselves aren't actually super long. It's, despite the size of this binding here, there's not actually that many words per page. It seems like this might be appropriate for a relatively younger audience as far as like fantasy type of stuff goes. Like, I might be mistaken on that, but that's kind of the impression that I've got with Le Guin. So Earthsea is something that's like, I've wanted to read Le Guin and for a while, and I've wanted to read Earthsea ever since a lot of my friends did like read along for several of the books, and we're all just praising like all of the books, loving them to death. I'm like, man, I really wish I could read those, but at the time I just didn't have time. That's always the case with me. I don't read quick enough for me to just be able to pick up random books on a whim. But Le Guin, Earthsea is something that I would definitely like to pick up in 2026. Potentially, I just think it would be a vibe. It might be one that I start like at the end of the year or something, moving into 2027. So maybe you'll see this mentioned in a video similar to this like a year from now. Who knows? I'm not entirely sure, but I have my eye on Earthsea for sure. Next up, and the final honorable mention, is going to be like technically cheating as far as this list is concerned by the rules that I set out, like an author that I haven't read before, and that's because it's Brandon Sanderson with the Cosmere. Of course, I mentioned I'll be finishing Wheel of Time, and finishing the Wheel of Time next year with those last 3 books means I'll be reading Brandon Sanderson with those last 3 books. But like, does that really count as Brandon Sanderson's books? It's kind of debatable. It depends on how you count it. I'm not personally choosing to count it just because it's not Sanderson's own creation in that sense. He's finishing the work of somebody else with those few books, whereas when I view like starting to read Brandon Sanderson will be like when I actually read the Cosmere or start reading the Cosmere. So that's something that may or may not happen in 2026. I am of course holding up the leatherbound for Elantris here, which would be the first book from Brandon Sanderson in his own stuff, non-Wheel of Time stuff, that I would be reading, and this one might happen because it's standalone, and because I'll have finished Wheel of Time, and up to this point I've been saying I'm not starting Sanderson until I finished Wheel of Time. That's basically a rule that I've set out for myself. So, you know, it's not horribly unlikely that I decide to pick up Elantris at some point in 2026, maybe later in the year or something. I don't know. Maybe if I'm hurting for having some reading diaries or something to fill out some Thursday episodes on the channel, maybe I'll start Elantris and like make the Cosmere kind of a regular reading diary type of thing on the channel for several years, kind of the way that I have done for Wheel of Time. That's something that I would definitely be interested in doing. So yeah, Brandon Sanderson is the last honorable mention. Probably a book that like I'm like this close to wanting to put on the list proper, but again, because I'll technically be reading Brandon Sanderson, that was the edge I needed to be like, nah, let's just keep that in honorable mentions. So now let's move into the special mentions, kind of those extra auxiliary items that I kind of talked about earlier that are a little bit different for the channel. So the first one of these authors is going to be Ottfried Häusler, a German author, which is a little bit weird, and that's part of the reason why I'm including him on this list, with Die kleine Hexe and Das kleine Gespenst. I have been learning a little bit of German on my free time, and these are a couple of children's books that I had recommended by a friend that I do want to check out. They seem super cute and charming, and as a way to, you know, kind of learn a little bit more German and some of the structure of things as far as utilizing them in story, kind of in this fashion, I feel like would be a pretty good learning experience as far as the German is concerned. I also have the English translations of these 2 books, so in all likelihood, if I were to pick up any Häusler, it would be with these, you know, kind of alongside the English translations to kind of try to see how much I can get with what little German I know, and then fill in the blanks using the English translations as like a learning exercise. It's not something that I'm guaranteeing will happen next year. In fact, it probably won't. But it is something that I do have my eye on. There's various other German type of stuff that I would like to read a little bit next year for a pretty similar reason. Next up, we're going to talk about manga, which is not something that I talk about super often on the channel, but I have reviewed a few manga things in the past, and the one manga that I more or less going to commit to for 2026, at least starting, is Good Night Poon Poon by Anya Asano. And it's been a minute. It's been a minute since I've read any manga. It's been since like January, February, sort of that sort of range when I finished reading Monster by Naoki Urasawa. Really liked Monster. And I planned to actually get to more manga earlier in the year for sure. It just hasn't happened. I haven't had time to be able to like just prioritize a manga, but I would like to at least read one manga in 2026, and this is the one that I'm pretty much committing to. If it's not this, it could be Nagabe's The Girl from the Other Side. That might be something that I do instead. But since both of these authors would be new authors for me, that's something that I decided to include for this list. I guess there's also the chance that I decide to just start reading Vinland Saga next year for some reason instead of doing these couple shorter series, but I don't think that one's super likely. But I figured I'd mention it anyway. Goodnight Poon Poon is my most likely pickup for my next manga read, so that's the selection for this list. Now we're going to get into the actual top 5 here, the 5 authors that I'm more or less confirming I will be reading for the first time in 2026. To start off at number 5 here, we're going to go into Chance Dillon, a booktuber buddy, with Mercy Tears of the Fallen. You did send me this advanced review copy around the time that Mercy actually came out. I'm going to be getting a hardcover copy of this actually when I go to Shadows Upon Time release event in November in North Carolina. I'm probably going to be meeting him there, and he'll apparently just be giving me a hardcover copy over there, which is super nice and very kind offer of him. Thank you very much, Chance, for that. And thank you for this as well. It's one of those things that's like, I wish I would have had time to be able to read this earlier, but I just kind of didn't because of other projects that I had going on. But I do plan to read Mercy next year, probably in like January or something like that, before I actually hop into the last few Wheel of Time books. And that's because Ill is the Fate, the second book in the Mercy series, is going to be coming out, I think, in February. I think that's when he has it scheduled to come out. And if that happens, I would like to have read Mercy around the time Ill is the Fate comes out, so that I can read Ill is the Fate around the time it comes out. That is something that would be super cool. It would probably conflict a slight bit with my timing for Wheel of Time, but it is something that I'm interested in doing. I at least want to start Mercy next year. Next up, we're going to talk about, I guess, a train of authors that come recommended from a very close friend of mine, Reen. Douglas Adams is one of his favorite authors. He loves Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy, and this is one that I've had my eye on for a very long time for pretty obvious reasons. And assuming that Reen is still up for it, this is a little bit debatable. This is one of those authors that's like, maybe this won't happen in 2026. I don't know. But since Reen actually turns 42 in November of 2026, it'll be his 42nd birthday. If you know, you know. Reen wants to reread the first couple of books of this for his 42nd birthday or around that time. At least that's what he told me like a year and a half ago at this point. It's been a while. But it was something that he did mention to me and was like, I want to do this thing. And I was like, I would totally do that with you. So we've kind of had it loosely planned that maybe this will happen. And it's also why I said if he is still up for it, which is debatable, I do want to read the first couple Hitchhikers books in November of 2026. And maybe it doesn't happen just because Reen isn't in the mood for it or something like that. But it is something that I have my eye on because of him. And if he confirms like halfway through 2026 or something that read is still on, I'll be joining him. But there's a chance that I replace that with like maybe one of the honorable mentions or something because maybe he doesn't actually want to read it anymore because he's in a reading slump or something. A lot can change in a year, so we will see what happens on that. But speaking a little bit more about Reen, one of his other favorite authors, Haruki Murakami, is an author that I actually wanted to get in 2025. I had pretty high priority to get to Hardboiled Wonderland and The End of the World as my first Murakami this year, and because of all the chaos this year, it just wasn't going to happen. And I got to about halfway through the year and I'm like, I don't think I can justify prioritizing this. I'll do it next year. So that's what I told Reen, and that's what I plan to do. I at least plan to read this one book next year. Maybe I'll read more Murakami next year, but who knows? I at least plan to start reading his material at that point. I'm interested in giving Murakami a shot, despite him being magical realism and my not being super into a lot of magical realism at this point. It's kind of been a hit or miss genre for me, but there are very many different flavors of magical realism, so I'm willing to give Murakami a shot. He's a flavor that I haven't tried. I'm interested and will be starting with Hard-Boiled Wonderland and The End of the World, and then kind of doing the rest of his books if I end up liking them enough in whatever order I see fit from there, just kind of willy-nilly. I don't think I'm going to have a set order for Murakami books. We'll see. But of course I have to enjoy him in the first place, and I'm probably going to read him next year. Another author here is, once again, for the third time in a row, another personal favorite of Reen's, but he's also a favorite of several other friends of mine, so it's not just him. Terry Pratchett with Discworld. This is a series that I had kind of written off early in my coming back to reading back in 2021. Kind of wrote it off, was just like, I don't think I'm interested in Discworld. And over the years, I've kind of gotten worn down by Reen and various other fans of the books. And I'm like, maybe that would be something that would be interesting to try. I'm willing to try. And for, was it my birthday last year or was it Christmas? I don't remember. It was one of those two. But Reen decided to be a crazy person and he gifted me the first 15 Discworld books, which is a lot. So I'm very sorry you wasted that money if it turns out I don't like Pratchett. But I am going to try Pratchett next year as a personal thank you to Reen for the gift, to kind of thank him for that. And also because I'm interested in trying Pratchett at this point, I am morbidly curious. And for those of you wondering, what order am I going to plan to read Discworld? I know nobody's going to be happy to hear this, especially after another booktuber recently tried starting with The Color of Magic and then basically dropped the series, and as far as I know hasn't returned to it, but I haven't really been paying too much attention to that. I do plan to read these in publish order. That is my plan with Discworld. I know that a lot of fans aren't going to be happy to hear that, and I know a lot of them are going to say, no, don't start with that because you'll just bounce off it like other people do and not continue the series. Rest assured, I have committed to Reen that I will be reading the first 5 to 10 books of the series. I mean, he gifted me 15 of them. If I don't put in a serious, honest effort to see what Pratchett does or doesn't work within the first 5 books, I would be doing both him and myself a disservice. And yes, I know the first few books aren't as popular. They're pretty unpolished according to most people. Mort is the best of the first 5, for example. But I do plan to get through the first few of these. And this is a case of not only do I think I'll be reading Pratchett in 2026, I will be reading multiple Pratchett in 2026. And this time I'm actually making a committed promise with Pratchett. I know people say don't start with The Color Magic, but to give people at least a little bit of assurance, theoretically, I'm going to start with it, and I will be reading 4 or more Discworld books in 2026. I don't know when specifically I'll be reading all of them, but this author is non-negotiable, and I will be reading at least through Mort, since people really like Mort, the 4th book in there. I will read at least the first 4 books of the series, and I will be reading all 4 of those in 2026, so it'll be putting in a real honest effort with the author. I'm not just going to read one and decide to drop the rest. I will read the first 4 books next year. Quote me on that. Do it, please. I'm probably going to regret saying that, but who cares? Anyway, the number 1 final author that I'm going to talk about in specific on this list is going to be an interesting one to talk about, because I've talked about him a few times up to this point in regards to I want to try this series or I want to try this author soon, and it hasn't materialized yet. But I think because of finishing Wheel of Time and being available and open to read more fantasy stuff as a result of that, being more personally, mentally open to that, I'm going to actually commit to finally reading some Matthew Ward. I've been wanting to read Matthew Ward for a few years now at this point. Side note, did you know that Matthew Ward here is actually a main writer on several of the Warhammer and Warhammer 40k video games that have come out, like Vermintide 2 and Dark Tide, and a couple of the other recent Warhammer property games? Yeah, Matthew Ward's a main writer on some of those, and he has fantasy stuff. I didn't even know he was a Warhammer writer until this point. I haven't even read any Warhammer, but that's cool. But I definitely want to read some Matthew Ward next year, and it will almost certainly be the Legacy trilogy that I do it with. And it's because this This trilogy has been on my list for forever. The concept has sounded good, but really it's like, this is my judge a book by its cover moment, where like I love the covers of these 3 books so much. It's like been high on my list to read just because of the covers. So here's hoping they're not bad. But in 2026, I will finally actually prioritize the Legacy trilogy. I do want to read all 3 of them next year. Maybe I don't get to all 3 of them. Maybe it's only like the first couple, but I'm going to try my best to read all 3 of them next year. I want to have, you know, the Wheel of Time finished by like the end of April or May or something like that. So I'll have like 6, 7, maybe 8 months or something like that with which to be able to freely read this trilogy, I guess, which means I could even do a once every other month routine with these 3 books and still manage to get through them or something like that. That's something that I'm looking forward to trying to do. I also want to note that Matthew Ward has another series called Soulfire out that I'm interested in trying. Legacy Trilogy is probably going to be the one that I prioritize a little bit, but I do want to read one of these 2 trilogies next year. In fact, I don't even know if Soulfire is actually a trilogy. I just know there's 3 books out. So maybe it's going to be more than that. If it's going to be more than that, I'm not going to start reading it next year. I'll do Legacy Trilogy instead. In either case, that is like the main bulk of my list. It's just kind of funny that like Matthew Ward is like the only epic fantasy author on this list where, you know, there's anything complete to actually go with. Of course, I did talk about Chance Dillon earlier, but like that's the start of what will be a 4-book series I'm pretty sure he has planned. Only first book is out right now. Second book will be out early next year. So I plan to read those first couple of books. But as far as like completed fantasy series, Matthew Ward's the only one on this list. I'm surprised I was able to keep it down to only one of those authors because I put so much other random weird stuff on here. If we want to talk about other epic fantasy authors I could read for the first time in 2026, I had plenty of options. Like there was Tad Williams with Memory, Sorrow, and Thorn. I had a little bit of Michael J. Sullivan I could try next year, although probably lower priority on that. Lycanius is something that I've been wanting to get back around to for several years at this point. That was a read along back in like April of 2022 that I missed, that I'm really sad I missed. Actually, I've been wanting to get back to Lycanius for forever. I also have Brian Lee Durfee on here. I've been wanting to read some of his stuff, that trilogy. Andrzej Sapkowski. I hope I pronounced that correctly. I'm pretty sure I didn't. In fact, I'm pretty sure I said Sapkowski instead of Sapkowski. I apologize. I probably butchered the entire name anyway, but The Witcher is something that I do want to read, not least because I want to read or want to play the video games here at some point pretty soon as well. Even Jay Kristoff, I'm interested in giving a shot. Shauna Lawless, and this is a little bit less epic fantasy and more like historical fantasy, set in, you know, ancient mythological Ireland. That's what it's called. But then the last author on this list, and really, honestly, this is going to be like the number 0 for the list, because this author I probably should have included on this list, and I don't really know why I didn't. It's probably because I had enough of these other authors that, like, I don't know. In reality, if there's any of these authors on the list that do not get read, the main top 5, they're going to be replaced by Ryan Cahill with The Bound and The Broken. This is kind of like the asterisk to the list where it's like, I forgot about Cahill for some reason while making the notes for this video until like I was like gathering books and stuff. I was like, wait a minute, I have Cahill. I don't own any of the Cahill hardbounds yet. I mean, I've bought them, but they haven't shipped yet. So they just weren't immediately on my shelves for me to realize that, like, wait, that's a new author that I want to read in 2026. And Bound and the Broken is one of my most anticipated series at this point. This is a series I will probably start next year, to be honest. Like, heavy probability that because I'll be done with Wheel of Time, that I start Bound and the Broken. This is something that I've been looking forward to for quite a while. So, like, as a number 0 for the list, Ryan Cahill is kind of there as one that I'm very likely to start in 2026, but that I'm not going to make any committed promises to, like I have a couple of these other authors. But in the end, as far as epic fantasy goes, I do have Matthew Ward here, and I do have 3 thick Wheel of Time books that I have to read early in the year, and then I do have Chance Dillon stuff that I do plan to read as well. So, like, Bound and the Broken, probably a little bit more variable. If it doesn't get read in 2026, it is being read in 2027 as the series is very near its close at that point. I just don't want to risk having too much fantasy, having too much epic fantasy in my TBR over the course of the year and risking burning out on the genre entire, because yeah, just finishing Wheel of Time will be so exhilarating that I could see myself risking too much and reading too much other epic fantasy and then burning out on it a little bit. And like, I haven't even talked about John Gwynne, of course, because I've read John Gwynne, but like the sequel series to Faithful and the Fallen, I would like to read that. Maybe that'll happen next year, maybe not, but like, you know, there's just too many things to read. Anyway, that is just going to be the end of this video. Thank you so much for watching. Probably in December, so here in a few months, I guess at this point, I'll have like a rough TBR lined out for 2026. So several of these authors you'll probably see in that TBR video. Last December, I did a similar one for this year, and boy, did that not end up working out, but a lot of that wasn't even my fault explicitly. But in either case, I should here in a few months have a more accurate like TBR projection video for 2026, where I go over some of the things like for the first half of the year, where it's like, this is basically what I plan to read first half of 2026, and then the back half has a few things that I would like to get to, and just have it be a little bit more variable. We'll see how things go, but these are some of the authors that I wanted to talk about, that I'm excited to read pretty soon, that I'm excited to start reading in 2026 in the case of at least several of them. Thank you so much for watching this video once again if you did. For now, I've been your host, King Crusoe. You can call me KC. Tell me what new authors you plan to read in 2026, if any. I'd be curious to hear about them, and I hope to see you guys in the next video.